Today I'll be showing you how to create movement trays like this, or these, using GW's repackaged Modular Movement Tray kit for Warhammer The Old World, and giving a review of whether I think the product is worth it. In the box you will get 2 base plates that you can use to create any number of smaller trays up to the size of 200 by 200 millimeters. So if we're thinking of 25mm bases, that's 8 by 8. So here are the base plates themselves. There's 2 of these, and on one side you have 25mm squares printed, and on the other the now completely redundant 20mm squares. Obviously it would have been better for them to have remade these with 25 on one side and say 30 on the other, but this is what we've been given. Also included in the pack are all the edges and corner pieces that we use to create the frame around the outside of the tray, and an instruction pack which recommends a razor saw. Oh, it's for cutting the edges. Okay. But no, normally I've just got a craft knife, a metal ruler, and some plastic cement. And that should be all that you need for putting these together. I don't imagine that we'll need a razor saw to cut the edges. We probably can just use a knife for that. So the first unit that I finished for my dwarves was a unit of iron breakers. So I'm going to create a tray for them first of all. There's been a lot of discussion about the different frontages that people might want for units. 7x3 seems to be a popular one for damage dealing units and hammers and things like that. For anvils, smaller frontage is possibly better, so that you have more staying power and better rank bonus in combat resolution. Since the iron breakers are heavy infantry, they can technically go down to a frontage of 4, but that then puts you in a tricky situation when you want to start putting characters in and things like that, and you'll very quickly end up in a marching column by mistake if you have a unit that's deeper than it is wide. So I'm going to go with 5 by 4, I think, for this unit. I should add at this point, before you start cutting into the tray, it makes sense to measure out which other units you think you're going to be able to get out of one tray. And you can go to increasingly neurotic levels of spreadsheets of planning out how many trays you'll need and units and so on. But these are not cheap compared to MDF movement trays. So I've worked out I wanted a frontage of 5, so to here, I should use my ruler to mark that off. Which leaves me then with this option of what I do with this L shape I'll have left around the unit. The recommendation for how you cut these in the booklet is to score the entire way along, rather than actually cutting through the plastic, just making a few passes so that you score the material and then snapping it, which means you obviously have to cut the entire length of the tray to do that. So that would leave me with another identical 5x4 block at this side. Now, I don't have any other anvil units really in my list that I'll want to run in this format. I might make a unit of warriors with shields instead and use them as a kind of cheaper version of iron breakers, but that's a ways off. So what I'm going to do with the second block is score all the way along, so I have that, snap this one, and then turn this into 2 blocks of 5, so that I can use these for missile troops and so on, possibly rangers, miners if I'm not taking my full complement of those. And then that leaves me with this 3x8 block here, which I can either leave as it is or cut it down to 3x7 and put perhaps hammerers or longbeards maybe into that format. So with that plotted out and making sure you're not going to end up with some useless offcuts at the end, we take the metal rule, we measure the number of squares we want, making sure that we're on the correct side, not the 20mm, 25mm squares. And then, in a series of light passes, score down the length of the tray. 7 or 8 passes later, and we have a fairly deep score along, you can see here hopefully, just how far I've gone in, along the tray. In future, if you have access to a proper workbench where you can attach clamps on the sides to hold this in place with your ruler, I would advise doing that. It's very easy for the knife just to skip out of the groove because they are quite shallow. And so this should be a deep enough score now to be able to score or snap along this line. So just taking the 2 sides and hold my thumbs close to it so it doesn't snap anywhere else, I'm just going to start bending. There we go. And then go back the other way. And we have our 2 trays. Once you've snapped the board apart, you might find that you end up with these little burrs of plastic from where you've cut into the board. So you can see there's a little ridge here that's a bit rough compared to the other parts. So I'm just going to take a craft knife and scrape along the edge as you would with a mould line remover. The booklet tells you to use a mould line remover, you obviously don't need one. The idea behind that product was, I believe, simply that small people cannot buy knives in shops, and so giving them a tool with which to remove mould lines so their models look cleaner, that they can all access and use, actually leads to a huge kind of increase in their enjoyment of the hobby. So, pricing of Games Workshop's tools is, yes, ludicrous, everything else is, but I think a lot of the derision that tool's received is frankly unwarranted. But, right, so I'm just going to scrape along this side and remove that messy part down here, always of course scraping away from me. There we have our finished edge. With your base plates all cut out to the desired sizes, I'm next going to start snipping off the corners that we'll need. We're going to need 12 of these obviously. So once I've cut all these out, I'll return and glue those on and then measure the edges. But not before we have scraped off the edges. The corner pieces have these 2 lips to them. We're going to glue the first lower of the lips under the base plate. The step up here to the second one is just to create a bit more movement space around the figure so they're not as tightly packed in as they would otherwise be. So taking just any plastic cement, I'm using Revel for this one, just going to apply some into the corner and then affix it to the tray, like so. Right, next we're going to snip off the edges. These are conveniently the right size for this dimension of unit on the front. So if you are creating a block that is 5 wide, you don't actually need to cut these at all. But for the ones on the side, obviously they will end up being slightly too long. Taking a Sharpie, I'm just going to mark on this edge piece the correct width that we want. So looks like about there. And I'm going to carry this line all the way around the shape so that it's a little bit easier to cut. With the piece corner side up, so that you have a stable surface to cut on, I'm just going to take a craft knife and press into the top, and I'm not going to try to score this one like with the base plate because there's no groove to line anything up with, and it's shiny plastic, and that's going to be much more risky trying to kind of hack backwards and forwards. So I'm just applying a kind of rocking motion and some gentle pressure on the top, and it does actually go through without too much difficulty. Do the same from this edge, and then from this side. And there we have a fairly neat cut actually, with no razor saw required. Voice from the future, just to say, do not get rid of your short offcuts. Something like this might at first look like it's going to be fairly useless, but having put the corners on for the 5x2s, you're left with this very small gap on either side, which the offcuts from the side pieces on this longer one end up being almost perfect. You get a tiny little offcut when you split it in half, but then these two will fit onto these ones. So we are left with more edges on the sprue in case we need them for future bases. So here we have our 3 constructed movement trays. You can, in a hurry, use them like this, but just as unpainted base edges are one of my pet peeves in the hobby, movement trays are likewise. So I'm going to apply some texture paste to them. This is Vallejo Diorama FX ground texture. Rough grey pumice, this one, which, if you look at the size of this tub, 200 mils of it, compared to the tiny little pots that you get of GW base textures, is definitely worthwhile if you make as many minis as I do. Once you've done all 4 edges, it's worth just checking that the top of the pieces is covered as well. Oddly, I think the hardest bit of the process so far has been putting it down after applying the texture paste. You're kind of gripping it around the sides and there's no easy way to let go of it without getting it on your hands, but I eventually managed. When you're leaving it to dry, it's worth just lifting it up off the mat. I'm using some old bases that I've snipped figures off, because you might have some texture paste on the bottom and you don't want that adhering to the surface, so creating a little plinth for it to stand on is helpful. With the texture paint all dry, this is what we're left with. So here's our Mournfang Brown, and I'm just using a fairly large size brush with watered down paint to get this covered quite quickly. You could, if you like, spray this. I don't think it needs priming especially, but if you have an airbrush, obviously that will be much quicker than applying this by brush. Or if you have any of those old rattle cans of specific coloured primers. Just for a bit more variety and to tie these better in with the bases of my figures, I'm adding a few spots of PVA around the edge of the base and sticking down some sand rock mixture. Next I'm painting over those gravel sections with Citadel Dawnstone. Again, it doesn't need to be particularly neat. Then we're just covering the entire thing with Agrax Earthshade. Then dry brushing over the earth sections with Gawthor Brown, and a lighter dry brush on top of Tyrant Skull. Next for the rocks, I darken those with Null Oil, a dry brush of Drawnstone, and Administratum Grey on top, lighter still. And to finish this off, some glue concentrated around the top of the base. And sprinkle some 2mm static grass. This stuff's from Jarvis Scenics on top of where we've added the glue, and then lightly tap off the excess. So here's the end result of all the hobbying we've done to the movement tray. This is the block of 5x4 iron breakers, of course. The techniques all work quite well. I'm happy with how they've come out. You could, if you want to go a bit further, apply some tufts to the edges instead of just using static grass. That would, mix it up a bit, give you some more interest, some more variety. But I'm not sure given the angle, the tuft coming out, this sort of diagonal thing would work quite as well. So there's one block. Here is an example of one of the missile troop trays that I created. Here's a 5x2 block of Thunderers, and these are still work in progress, as you will see from the bases, but soon to appear on the channel once I've finished off the rest of these. I've got 20 Thunderers in total to paint up. So, hobbying, yes, they work, happy with the result. Product-wise, review time, do I think they're worth the cost? Sort of. For me they were, given the circumstances. I'll explain that in a little bit. Cost-wise, I just want to set out exactly how much more expensive this is than alternatives. For all historicals, I use MDF bases from a company called War Bases in the UK. I'll put a link to them in the description. I priced up the equivalent that I got from one tray of the GW kit versus what I could get on there. So, to recap, one 200 by 200 sheet half of a pack, gave me a block of 5x4 for Ironbreakers, 2 blocks of 5x2 for Thunderers, and 1 block of 8x3 that I'll use for Hammerers, or perhaps cut down to 7x3. The equivalent thing in MDF from Warbases comes out to £7.10 without shipping, versus GW, half a kit, £12.50 for this lot. So you're paying, about a £5 more minus postage, unless you're getting it shipped from GW. You could get it cheaper if you buy it through friendly local game store and get their discount of 10 to 15%, whatever they do. So, it's not drastically more expensive, actually, than people have seemed to be saying. A £5 is, it's not to be sniffed at, but what I like about these was the versatility they gave me. The Old World is a new system. We didn't know at the start what the meta would be in terms of unit frontages, and to a large extent we still don't. With an evolving system, it's quite nice, I think, to be able to have on the shelf a ready kit that you can go away and turn into whatever tray dimensions you choose to go with after a few test games. Knowing that they're there, knowing that kit is ready and you can build it up when you want to, versus ordering either a large range of MDF trays in a kind of speculative manner, not knowing what you'll end up with, possibly having some being redundant, needing to order more of what you ended up using, or constantly ordering more, paying shipping each time, waiting on postie for it to arrive every time you want to try a different format. So on the kind of readiness front and the convenience of that, for me, yes, it's worth the extra £5 from this, half a kit selection. £10 if you're thinking of the whole tray. What do I like about these trays? Like I said at the start, the beveled edges on the sides I find more visually appeasing than the MDF slab side ones, and the width of the MDF border around the trays is not greatly to my liking. Is that worth the cost? No. That's copium at this point. What don't I like about these? The border's actually a bit larger than I expected it to be. If you look, when you kind of push these to one side, because I said about these two lips in the edges, you can see there's actually quite a sizable gap from only 5 figures here between one fig and the end of the tray, which, I don't know, it does do away some of that appeal from the sides, I guess. Also, it takes longer to build, obviously. With MDF, you just get the pieces, whereas this took, as you saw, quite a lot of scraping, gluing, and so on, just to get to the same starting point you would have with MDF right out of a package. This is also working under the assumption, I should add, that your army is compatible with the base sizes these trays were designed for. Either in the sense of whether you have 25mm squares as your common base type, like for dwarves, that works then, or if you want unit sizes that fit within that 8x8 profile. If I was going to be doing a 10x2 block of Thunderers all as one long line, that wouldn't be accommodated by these trays. I could only get 8 in line. If I had an army of, say, 30mm squares and I wanted, an odd number that didn't neatly fit into a multiple of 20 or 25mm, then I would be out of luck as well. So that's also a really important consideration. Look at what you want to put in a movement tray, look at the base size of the model, see if it will actually fit within the confines of what the tray gives you before you purchase these. So there isn't really a simple answer here. If I had a 3D printer, that would be another option. Although I have heard about the kind of difficulty some people have had with warping when producing fairly large, flat, thin products on those. So, you might have different success with that. The cost of someone else printing it for you, the shipping, the design for the STLs and so on, I don't know how much you'd really save on that. Maybe someone can in the comments fill me in on exactly what that comparison would be for price. Versus what I do know, which is MDF, the price is not negligible, but I view this as one of those kind of initial outlay sort of frivolous purchases we make when a new system comes out. like buying, individual dice for your specific army. I have plenty of dice. I don't need specific dwarf dice. But when they come out, yes, I'll probably be that sucker who goes and buys them anyway. That sort of product. Plus, like I said, the convenience of having a range of options that I can create as I see fit, as I build the army up. Final bit of housekeeping is just to say, obviously, these Thunderers will be the next thing on the channel. There's another 10 that I'm working on at about the same state at these ones. So if you're interested in seeing my continued updates with this army, please do, I can't believe I'm saying this, like and subscribe to the channel, and you will see those soon, plus some hero figures. I've got a Thane, a Battle Standard Bearer, and a Runesmith on the go at the moment. And that's everything for today. Good luck with all your hobbying, and see you next time.